Ready? Are you ready?
Born
Do
ready.
you need to do some throat exercises?
La 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 la.
Things straightened out. Let's get this ironed out. Let's get it all squared away. It's perfectly easy. Because we don't have to think about it. In other words, the brain is a network of interconnected neurons. Sometimes when I'm in...
Hello, you're back with me, Lily, as we introduce our second series of podcasts. This series is called Speak, and I'll be interviewing some truly incredible pioneers of change, hearing all about their stories and the ways that they are trying to make the world a better place. You can download and listen from all your favourite streaming platforms, so get ready to be inspired, and we hope that you enjoy.
Much separation. If we're to change our ways, it'll take conversation and collaboration, good company.
So my name's Rick Findler. I am an independent photojournalist and keynote speaker. The photos I take, I try and spend as much time abroad doing humanitarian stories and features focused in and around the conflict zones. So I did the rise and fall of ISIS from 2012 to 2017, spent a lot of time in Syria, Iraq, and then have been to other places such as Beirut, Somalia, Burundi, Libya, and then off to Afghanistan next week.
Wow. International jet setter.
International jet setter, badass, yeah.
That is a good title. So how long have you been doing this work?
So I did psychology at university.
Yeah.
And after that I hated it. And then after that I did a master's in photojournalism. So that was a year course, and then I finished that in 2007. And then after that I worked in a pub for 2 years.
Nice.
But whilst working in a pub I was just taking pictures of anything I could.
Yeah.
And then so I think the first time I jumped on a flight to go somewhere was 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So where are we now? 21, so 12 years. I said no maths.
Maths question out of the way. Wow, so you're well and truly into it now. I mean, what did you know at the point that you were studying the direction that you hoped it would take you?
Yeah.
Did you have a clear vision?
I did. Yeah, I did, absolutely. I said on the first day of my photojournalism masters, our lecturer said, introduce yourselves and explain why you're here. And I said, my name's Rick Findler, I want to be a war photographer.
Wow.
And I want to win World Press Photo of the Year award. But that was my and now I'm a lot more educated in the field and have come to realise what the profession is about. I now no longer, my strive isn't to win an award. It would be nice, but it's not the main focus. But as an example, to tell you just how much I knew the direction I wanted to travel in from 12 years ago. Yeah.
But also I think, when you're at that point, when you're studying and you're just starting out, it's really important to set yourself a personal goal of what, because that's what you're thinking, isn't it? What can I achieve? As well as what do I want to do? How do I want to make a difference? And I think that's a good goal to have, actually.
Yeah, it was definitely something to focus on, and even though you're from working in a pub, remember that was after the masters. So even working in a pub for 2 years, I still had that in the back of my mind as a sort of goal in the distance to focus on. Yeah,
makes the pub work bearable.
Yeah, exactly. I loved the pub, and plus it was in London as well. And if there was ever a student demo or a protest going on down the road, and if my manager was pretty cool, and I had my cameras at the pub, so if ever there was anything happening down the road and it sounded like it was getting out of hand, I'd always ask and say, look, can I go and take pictures?
So why conflict? Why kind of war photography? Why not flowers and animals and rainbows and celebrities and?
I mean, I think that I started taking pictures of landscapes and sunrises and, you know, panoramics and things like that. And then that was while I was doing my psychology degree, but as I started to sort of read more newspapers and I saw photos from Iraq and Afghanistan, I thought those are the sort of pictures I want to be taking. And I've always been, you know, I love extreme skiing, and my sister's an extreme skier, pro skier, and so the both of us have always had this adrenaline trait, you know, adrenaline seeking trait to us. So photos of landscapes and sunsets, although I still thoroughly enjoy doing them, that wasn't going to cut what I sort of wanted to focus on. You know, it wasn't the type of photography, and celebrities can fuck themselves.
Quote of the year. Yeah, I think it's an absolutely fascinating area to specialise in, and to really literally put yourself in the firing line of, I guess. And I wonder, how does your psychology degree and your study of people and the mind play into the actual work that you're doing?
Amazing.
Crossover.
Amazing. I got asked that 2 days ago.
Did you?
And I've never been asked that before. So
Wow.
that's twice in 2 days. How weird is
I
that?
need to up my ante.
So, and my answer, even though it was to quite a well-established businessman who I was hoping to do a lot of talks through his company, I actually gave him quite an honest answer, and I said, you know, unfortunately, and to the disappointment of mum and dad, I didn't learn anything doing my psychology degree. I mean, I really didn't. I didn't pay any attention.
Cool.
So the psychology degree for me was a lot of stats, like statistics and maths. Like 2 of the 5 modules we were doing was statistics, and so it was a very quick turn off from why I was originally interested in psychology. So the immediate crossover of you know, how much do I sort of tap into my psychology of the sort of psyche of the brain when relating it to what I've witnessed or what I've been through, that I really don't make that crossover. Unfortunately, I wish I did pay more attention and at least, you know, that. And I think I even remember sort of I did try and answer the question. I said, you know, both me and my sister being adrenaline junkies, is it nature or nurture? You know, were we both born with it, or did we learn to become adrenaline, like seeking adrenaline? You know, to which I don't have the answer to that, but at least I got at least I slid in the nature nurture phrase, so it sounded like I did learn something, but it's an unanswerable question.
Yeah,
so.
for sure. Well, I mean, I wonder though how much it. Okay, maybe not necessarily your studies or any information that you may or may not have retained, but your drive to initially be interested in the human brain ties into...
I suppose it does, yeah, and the obsession with human behaviour. You know, I wanted to study psychology because I wanted to know why people behave the way they do. And actually, if you think about it, photojournalism is documenting human behaviour, isn't it?
Yeah.
That I can't believe I've never made that link. You've just broadened my horizons.
Well, you know, your degree wasn't for nothing.
Yeah.
That's what we can establish today, if nothing else.
And this chat wasn't for nothing.
No.
Because that has really opened my eyes. I'm amazed at that.
I mean, in terms of human behaviour, what do you think? I've never seen humans behaving in that, like, completely extraordinary way as we do when we're in conflict or war. I mean, what is that like on the ground, firsthand, to witness from your point of view?
It's both. I mean, it's both extremes of humbling, you know, like educational and the appreciation that people have for their fellow human from the one side of it. But then, of course, you have the just what humans are capable of in the negative sense to another human, you know, because it is in war zones where you find humanity at its best, where where they'll give you their last bit of food or last bit of water, and they'll open their doors to you and won't leave until you've had at least 3 courses with them, and you know, and they might be some of the poorest people on the planet, you know. I mean, in South Sudan we were doing a feature on former child soldiers, and went to some of the poorest villages, you know, but they were so adamant to give us everything they had, you know, and it's just fascinating to see that. But on the flip side, then you see the true horrors of humanity. So yeah, there's 2 very different extremes, but one the good side and the bad side.
Yeah. And I suppose, you know, we all exist, I guess, on that spectrum, depending on what situation we found ourselves in. And it's always an interesting thought I find is, how would I respond if I was in such an extreme situation? And you've witnessed people's reactions and responses in all kinds of different ways. And that's fascinating.
Yeah.
You must learn a lot about that spectrum.
You do. You learn a lot about people's behaviour, but you also start to realise that you also have this sort of appreciation for, because you've seen humanity at its worst, you therefore appreciate just the smallest gestures of kindness, and it makes you not to sort of put yourself on a pedestal, but because you've seen how bad people can be, it definitely teaches you to show just how, if the human body is capable of that, if the human mind is capable of that, you want to try and get as far opposite to that as possible. And that definitely has turned me into a much nicer person, because I used to be a right arsehole at uni, like got in fights like all the time. I was I was the rowdy one that was looking for fights at raves and things like that. And we say, and but to completely counteract that now, I'd like to think that I respect my fellow human being a lot more, and even if someone is being a dick, I'd much rather try and think, why is he being a dick? He might, or she, they must have something going on. I feel sorry for them, rather than let's go punch his lights out.
There's a bigger picture.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
So
and I guess you've seen the consequences of what happens if you don't respect that.
Yeah.
Because I guess we all have it in us. We could all be a part of a war. We could all be that guy, that dickhead, that, And it is a practice to be kind, to be compassionate. You have to make that choice, I guess. What's the relevance for you for like the wider society, the benefit of kind of visual storytelling?
There's a number of benefits.
A nice way of asking what's the point.
Yeah, it's a very, very sugar-coated way of asking. I think there's a number of reasons and a number of answers, and one, it's the obvious one is documenting history. So when in 200 years' time the teachers say at school, let's look at the Syrian civil war, and they open their books or laptops or whatever they have, and then there's your pictures, and if you don't record it, then it can be forgotten. And I think, and a side note from that is when people say, don't you feel bad taking pictures of dead bodies and things? If there's a dead body in the picture, don't you feel a bit shameful and things? To which, and this isn't my quote, but someone said, a death not documented is a death forgotten. And so I don't, because I think that to shy away from death, to shy away from that poor person who's perished because of this conflict, then it would be a disservice. I think that the fact that someone's died should generate more attention to the court, to what's happening elsewhere in the world. So you have the documenting of history, you have the fact that you're there, that you're witness, you've got a front row seat to the world's history unfolding in front of your eyes. And And I mean, I think that for me as well, it's the element of not sitting at a desk for 90 hours a week or something like that. I mean, I admire the people that can do that because they earn a lot more money than me. But and you know, my dad was a city worker and things and worked extremely hard. But I mean, I don't have the attention span or the discipline to do that.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to do anything, I may as well sort of tick all the boxes of wanting to shine a light on people's stories, document history, and take badass pictures, while doing it.
Yeah. And that is timeless.
Yeah.
Like you say, you're documenting history.
Yeah, it's also holding people to account as well, you know. And it's say, you know, look at Auschwitz or something. If that didn't get documented, then that wouldn't have been, you know, then that could have easily been forgotten about, and the whole premise behind it would have been completely overlooked. If that went completely unnoticed, then, and if you have war crimes and you document war crimes nowadays, then the repercussions of it can be quite serious, or you can raise awareness, and you can look at specific examples. I can't think of any at the minute where photos have led to investigations into war crimes. You know, Assad gassing the people in northern Syria when Obama was still in power. You know, and if there wasn't a photographer there to document it, then Assad was never going to be held accountable for gassing his own people.
Well, it's a big part of how we collect evidence now. It's a huge part of the smaller systems in terms of change and reformation, and, you know, being able to have hard, tangible evidence that goes beyond hearsay, I guess. Yeah. Beyond just a witness having to explain what they've seen, you know, it's an important tool.
Yeah, and that is a reason why photographers are, I think they're quite disliked in a sense, but the reason they're disliked, the fact that they're disliked shows the power of an image. You know, because like you say, it is evidence essentially. And if you're there taking these pictures, and if they don't like you taking these pictures, then they've obviously got something to hide. Yeah. And there you are documenting it and using it as evidence to prove that something untoward has happened.
How easy is it to manipulate that though? On the flip side, how easy is it to create a false story from an image? And this is a slightly controversial question in terms of manipulating what you're seeing to make it look like something else, because that must happen all the time. It
can happen. It can easily happen, but that's where the sort of code of ethics and morals come into it, and what your end goal is. Yeah. You know, I mean, because then you're sort of tapping into propaganda. Yeah. So if you're a government affiliated photographer, you're going to be taking pictures to show a very one-sided story. So that's why you can't take a government affiliated photographer as documenting reality, documenting history, because you know that they've got an agenda. Whereas for independent photographers, independent journalists, they have a duty to which they stand by, but for displaying the truth and doing the background research and keeping as honest as possible. And that, you're right, no one, if you're going to be a dick, no one's there to technically stop you. I mean, if you get caught doing it, you'll never get another job in your field again, and no one will use you because you're just completely untrustworthy. And if you want to be a journalist or a photojournalist and you're supplying to the newspapers or publications or news broadcasters,
you want people to trust.
Precisely, yeah. So if you start fabricating what's in your picture or making up quotes, then you're right, there's like no physical barrier to stop you. You can do that, but then you're just going completely against everything that your profession stands for.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, the relevance of kind of independent photographers, reporters is so important in an age of propaganda where there are so many questionable agendas, and we have so much access to information through the media that it's really hard to decipher what to trust from just the kind of average viewer. And what I really like is being able to see something that's just unadulterated. It's just the truth you've captured, what's happening, with no agenda, no kind of political siding or, this is what's happening. And I really value seeing that. I think it's such an important part of our cultural narrative are the people who are willing to put themselves at risk, because, you've put yourself in some situations. What are some of the most challenging places you've been or things that you've tried to capture?
I'd say that the most challenging would be Syria in 2012 when the borders were closed. And so Ben, the journalist friend of mine, and we went to Turkey to try and get into Syria whilst the borders were closed. And the only way in or out was to get smuggled in. So it took us 9 days to find smugglers that we could trust. I mean, when we were in Turkey, we stood out like a sore thumb, right? And so people would come up to us and say, "Oh, are you journalists? I can get you into Turkey. I can get you into Turkey."
Yeah.
But you just couldn't trust anyone, because it could be a sad regime letting you into a trap, or it could be there could be spies or anything like that. So it took us 9 days to find someone that we could trust, who then organised smugglers to smuggle us through. So the story, a very summarised story, is we had to wait until dark. Oh, I had to dye my hair. I had to dye my hair black.
What hair?
Yeah, this is when I had hair. Had to dye my hair black, dye my eyebrows. I looked absolutely ridiculous, but our fixer didn't want me standing out so much. So in the end, I just looked like a weird albino kid with black hair. It looked ridiculous. Dyed my hair before going in, then waited until dark, went loaded into a van, driven into the hills, and kicked out at about midnight. And then we had to hide in a ditch. The Assad troops had seen our lights, so we're patrolling on the Syrian side of the border with their motorbikes for 2 hours looking for us. So we hid in this ditch for 2 hours. Eventually they left, and then a guy came out of the bushes in his underwear, soaking wet, saying, "You can swim?" And we were like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, come with me." So we stripped down to our boxer shorts and had to swim through a river up to our necks in this stank of diesel, this diesel-smelling water, with our flak jackets, helmets, camera gear above our heads, over this river, which was the Syrian-Turkey border, into Syria, into a waiting car, and then we were in Syria for a week, and we were the only Western journalists in Syria at the time.
Wow.
So that was probably the most difficult place to get in or out of. Getting out of was even more difficult than that.
How did that feel? I mean, did you feel like your life was under threat?
Yeah, I was shitting myself.
Yeah,
I was absolutely shitting myself. It was so dangerous. It's
mental.
Yeah. And,
I mean, I feel to add, like, don't try this at home message.
Yeah, don't try and smuggle yourself into Syria. Yeah, that should be a message.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, Syria, we were in and out of Syria a lot between 2012 to 2014, and there was no definitive front line. You could be on one road 1 minute, you're with them the whole time. Libya, there was a definitive front line. You could go to the front line and you could come back. But Syria, it was just so fluid and so dangerous. And like I said, one road was safe and then 10 minutes later it wasn't. And a lot of the time in the car that we had, you had a guy on a motorbike in front of that car checking just round the corner, and then he'd have to stop, say, "No, there's a Syrian tank there, we can't go that way." Or so Syria was by far the most dangerous,
the least secure. I mean, you're literally putting yourself out, and without any kind of body or person of reference to know that I can count on that person.
I mean, we had each other, Ben and I, and that was it. And also, especially with these rebels, they don't care about you. You're just tagging along. If you get injured, they'll leave you. So it's not like if you were with the British Army on a deployment to Afghanistan and you were embedded press photographer, they'd look after
They've
you.
got some kind of duty to want to make
precisely.
sure you're okay,
And they're trained soldiers. These rebels, they don't know what they're doing half the time. You know, they're not necessarily soldiers. They're teachers or car mechanics that just joined the revolution to fight against Assad or ISIS.
Chaos.
Yeah.
Chaos.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you, if you could, I don't know, how can you sum up something so visual, but in terms of the outcome of all of that risk, how could you describe what you captured, what you managed to put together and
I think that I managed to get together a body of work which documented the start of the Syrian uprising, which I mean, it was incredibly complicated, but it actually started quite simple. It was just people fighting or sort of a revolution against President Assad. And so because we were there so early on, that's what we documented, and it was just that's all it was. Whereas over the years that we were going, then the rebels became more heavily armed, then Saudi Arabia started getting involved, and then you had the splinter groups which started affiliating with Al-Qaeda, and then ISIS came out in 2013, 2014, and then it went into this huge, multifaceted conflict with so many sides fighting against so many sides. And then to go back into Syria in 2017 to spend time with the Kurds fighting ISIS on their last stand in Raqqa, then it kind of helped summarize, it helped sort of close that whole chapter of documenting the rise and fall of ISIS, you know. And even though to start with no one knew ISIS existed, but when we started seeing them becoming more and more prevalent in their focus, and when they took Mosul, like when we got word ISIS had taken Mosul in 2014, Ben and I, we were at Queen's tennis, darling, and it was a Thursday, and we were hammered, right? It was like the Queen's tennis finals or whatever, and Ben got a text saying ISIS had taken Mosul, and we left Queen's, went to his house and booked flights, and Friday 6 o'clock in the morning we were on flights out to northern Iraq. So that was 2014, and then so you know we were in, and then because we were so naive to start with that what ISIS was going to turn into, we were just as, if not more, interested, because we'd seen this whole arch of success of ISIS.
I mean, you knew it was going to be something. There was something.
Yeah. I mean, when they took Mosul's Iraq's second largest city. You know, they went from when they in Mosul, everyone gets paid in cash on the same day, and what ISIS did is they waited outside the major banks of Mosul, waited for the delivery trucks, and ransacked the trucks that were delivering to the bank. Within a day, they got $400 million in cash in one day. And then they ransacked all the prisons in Mosul and released everyone who were battle-hardened criminals from Saddam Hussein's reign. And Saddam Hussein and ISIS are kind of on the same side, and said, come and fight for ISIS. So within 3 days, when they took Mosul, they went from 200 troops to 3,500 troops with $400 million of cash, and went nuts. And then that's when they started beheading people, throwing people off buildings, burning them alive, public executions, and they were using fear. They did that on purpose, and they used fear as such an effective tool, because 50,000 Iraqi troops legged it. They were like, we are not fighting these guys.
Yeah. Gosh, and there you are.
And then that's when we arrived, yeah.
Wow. Do you have a favourite image?
I do. I have. There's one which was of the Free Syrian Army rebels in 2012. So it was still. Or was it 2013? It might have been 2013, and this was relatively early on still. But they were asking for help from the West, and they were underarmed. They were fighting Assad troops who were heavily armed, and they were asking for weapons, and the West weren't giving them any, because they started seeing factions splinter off, and Al Qaeda and this, you know, rumbling of ISIS. And the West were like, there's no way we're giving you weapons because you're starting to look a bit worse. You know, you're looking a bit more dodgy. Yeah. So they were resorting to anything that they could build and sort of anything they could get their hands on to fight against the Assad regime. When we came across these guys who had, they made homemade grenades, and they were using a homemade catapult to fire these grenades over a wall into an area that had Assad troops. But then they ran out of grenades, so they just started picking up lumps of concrete, and like there was like 6 of them pulling this big catapult thing back and launching it, and it was like something out of the Roman times, you know. And it was such a, like you didn't really realise what you were witnessing because you were pumped full of adrenaline and you're just waiting for a mortar round to come and kill everyone, you know. So you're expecting something to happen. And
how hard is it to take a photograph, to concentrate and take a decent photograph when you're? I mean, is it harder or is it easier? Does that adrenaline help you? Because I'd be like this.
Yeah, I mean when you try and focus on taking a picture, that helps you not think about, Christ, I'm going to die any second.
The imminent threat to your life.
Yeah, precisely. So you actually try and really focus on shutter speed, aperture, you know, framing a picture, which focuses your mind on little tasks that you can successfully do, rather than cowering in a corner somewhere thinking that you're going to die any minute. So the ability to focus on taking that picture helps steady your hand, because if you think of anything else, you're shitting it, you know.
That's an incredible skill.
Yeah.
I just don't know that I could do it. I mean, I'm not a photographer at all, but just as a human being, putting myself in that position, I can't even imagine. And it's such it's almost like such an abstract thought to imagine that kind of war-torn scenario, and then you crouch down, just snapping away.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were on either side, I'd be so angry that you were there. You'd be my first target.
Well, the press have become more, you know, sort of A-list targets over the last, you know, 10, 15 years. And Don McCullen, you know, someone asked me when, you know, if I could cover any conflict in history, what conflict would it be? And I said Vietnam.
Yeah.
Because Don McCullen said that he could order a helicopter, like ordering a taxi, and they could just take him anywhere he wanted and drop him down. And I think Vietnam was the last conflict that, as a photographer, if you were shot, it's just bad luck. Like you were just wrong place, wrong time. But you could still go to the markets, you could still, you know, wander around, and you were relatively, you weren't a target. Whereas now, pretty much any conflict, you're much more of a target, because people see you with a camera as a threat. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the power of a photograph and the documenting of people committing these war crimes.
Gosh, it's quite an inspiring story to hear about.
Yeah.
Like, it's so amazing to really take it in. And that's been the last, 12 years?
Yeah.
And now you do talks?
Yeah.
And you're kind of focusing on developing it more, so you really want to get into it more?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, I'd like to take pictures more, but the money that's there now, and, you know, newspapers are just hemorrhaging money. They're very much on the back foot. You could say it's a dying medium, and the unfortunately the price of an image is decreasing when the cost of your camera kit is increasing. And long gone are the days where you could make a living being, you know, a jet-setting photojournalist. It just doesn't exist anymore. So now, you know, a number of photographers, I was speaking to one who does a lot of work for Time magazine and New York Times and things, and he was like, you know, tomorrow I have to go and do 150 headshots of staff at a hotel, you know, and a lot of people do weddings and things, but you don't see that because they don't want you to see that.
No.
What you do see is every so often they can fund a trip to go to, the Amazon or do some weird and wonderful feature which they'll be able to sell, but
it's a small part of the whole picture.
Yeah, precisely.
That's a terrible pun, isn't it?
Yeah. Well done though, very clever. But yeah, so it's the talks. I mean, I love the talks. That I do a lot of talks at schools and colleges, and they're very different to the talks I do to companies. Whereas, the schools, it's great because it gets them to think outside the box. It raises their awareness of what other professions are out there rather than chemistry, biology, and geography and things, and opens their eyes to what's happening in the world. But that talk that I deliver to the students is very much like, check how epic these stories are, look how epic these photos are.
This could be you.
Look how cool I am, kind of thing. Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. Great for the ego, but yeah.
Whereas the companies, I focus more on how can if a company's going to pay me to do a talk, they're going to want something in return. They don't just want an hour's long entertaining talk. So I've sort of delved back into I've kind of tried to read more into psychology recently about the sort of psyche of success of small tasks, and instead of getting overwhelmed by the bigger picture, like I sort of try and what's the words not collaborate but compare a conflict to everyday life. Whereas I know that sounds quite difficult, but if you think about nowadays, we're surrounded in a world of fear and anxiety. Fear, anxiety, and death is just on the other side of that door with the virus that's with the pandemic. So I use examples that I've got, say from being in a firefight in Libya. How do I operate? Well, I focus on the small things. I focus on my camera. I focus on shutter speed, and that A, focuses the mind. B, it allows you the success of small tasks, which then encourages more confidence and courage to then break out of your comfort zone even more. And I think that we're all far too comfortable these days. I mean, look at us. Like everything is at our fingertips, and we live in a world where a major disaster is our phone running out of battery. Right? And because of that, I think that's actually stifled us as humans. We're no longer. It's when we push our boundaries, push out of our comfort zone. That's where we grow. That's where we learn. But we're not doing that anymore.
No.
And so and that's made us too paranoid about the outside world when it should be the opposite. Okay, wash your hands with regards to the virus, right? Take the steps and put the mask on and things, but don't let the worry and anxiety stifle your behaviour.
I think you're absolutely right. I think we've become accustomed to such comfort, such luxury, that actually that's so abnormal for like the history of mankind. We don't have to think about survival, really. And then because that's become such a weakness, it's so easy for tools like the media to infiltrate and play on that fear that we all have, because we don't have to think about where our next. Most of us, in kind of a modern society, we've got heating. We don't have to think about those real practical outside of the house tools for looking after ourselves, and in that respect, it's like we've come further away from the concept of death, and that we almost feel like we're in this little kind of bubble wrapped world. We don't have to make fires for ourselves anymore, we don't have to hunt for our food, and I think that takes us down a really weird pathway of being distant from what it means to be a human being. And then when we do see these things displayed on the media, it seems so far away from our reality, we just change the channel.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying about that affecting how we relate to success or pushing yourself, or we've lost that kind of momentum. And I really love just the image of you trying to take a photograph and concentrating. I think we're capable of so much more than we have to be now. And as a message to kind of get across to business people or even students, that's a pretty powerful one.
Yeah.
Saying, you know, you can think bigger.
Yeah, and it makes people more aware of what they're capable of, and I think it can help reduce their anxiety and their worry, and also the sort of the fear management, and the realization that it's not so, you know, fear is such a fabrication. Fear, you know, I mean, you're born with only two fears, right? Loud noises and the fear of falling. Everything else is learnt. And if everything else is learnt, then a fear, if we're scared of going outside, then it's an imagination. It's a fabricated thought that, I mean, so therefore you're not rooted in reality. You're thinking of something that hasn't actually happened yet, because we're still inside. So focus on things that you do, that are in front of you. Focus on things that you do have control over, rather than being in some dreamland of fear. Stay rooted and focus on the things that you have control over.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. You do know more about psychology than you let on.
Yeah, it sounds like that. It sounds like it. I'm a good actor. Yeah. Check my lines. Yeah.
Wow, it's it does make me think of lockdown. I've seen some